don't know me, my name is Richard Vining. I'm the founder and owner of Marigold Law Group here in Victoria. We have a wonderful office based out of Courtney Street, just across the street from the court offices and down the street from Christchurch Cathedral, so happy to be part of the downtown business community. A little bit about our firm. We've been open just over a year. We're very much a small family business ourselves. My lovely wife Christina over there is our office head administrator, and we get to juggle the exciting tasks of finding ways to fit our work schedule around picking our son up from daycare at 4 p.m. So I feel a lot of your pain there. We specialize, or we focus rather, on a few different key areas that are kind of pertinent to this conversation. We do a lot of work with small and medium-sized businesses, corporations, contract review, commercial leasing, document drafting, that sort of thing. We also do a lot of estate planning, and as we're going to talk briefly on today, those two areas do coincide a lot, particularly when you're talking about sort of closely held businesses. We also do some real estate work to support our clients in other areas. And my cards are around if you want to reach out. We'd be happy to talk to you more in depth about your own needs, with a consultation. So just to kind of gauge things here, who here is an owner of a small business? Okay, great to know. And then of those people, at the moment, whose business is a sole proprietorship? Okay, whose business is incorporated? Is anyone here part of a partnership? Okay, so we've got a good mix of those things. That's awesome. We'll have lots to talk about here today then. So, very brief kind of introductory talk on these subjects. Like I say, happy to get into more of them in more depth afterwards, and we will have some time for questions and answers because my presentation is going to be fairly succinct. So we're going to talk a little bit about business structures, a little bit about some of the specifics relevant to estate planning for business owners, and a couple examples, certainly not the only strategies, but a couple examples of strategies in estate planning that are basically particularly suited or only really available to small business owners, and we'll talk about how they can help smooth your succession planning for your business and potentially save you and your family and loved ones a bunch of money. Who loves saving money? So firstly, business structures, so 101. Without getting into some of the really niche things, there's essentially 3 kinds of business structures that you may not even realize that you're part of, but it sounds like everyone kind of knows what they are, which is good. So, sole proprietorship, a partnership, or a corporation. A sole proprietorship is really the easiest way to get into business. You basically just decide you're going to start doing something for money, and you're a sole proprietorship, right? Everything happens under your own name, or you can have a trade name associated with that, but essentially it's just you out there in the world doing business. That comes with some real benefits. The first one being ease of formation. As I said, you just start doing whatever you want to do professionally, and boom, you've started your business, right? And also, of course, as the sole proprietor, the business is you, you're the business, you have direct control over everything. And there's also some tax advantages if particularly when you're starting out. You may not be producing a lot of profit relevant to the amount of money that you're putting into the company because the business is you. Any losses flow through to you personally. It does come with some distinct cons, however, which we'll talk about a little bit. But the first one, of course, is that because you are the business, and this is really the big one, if the business is liable for something, that means that you are personally liable for it. So if you start a factory and you're producing widgets, and one of your widgets blows up and hurts someone, and they come after you, the business, well, you as the person and all of your personal assets are on the line liability-wise as well, which can be a real issue, especially in an increasingly litigious world that we seem to live in. Right? The other one, which I've sort of outlined there, is limited growth potential. as a sole proprietorship, it's not impossible, but it makes it more complicated and a little bit more difficult to bring other people sort of more deeply into your company, because as soon as you have someone who's sort of a partner, then you're no longer in a sole proprietorship. Whether you considered it or not, formed a partnership at that point, and it makes it very difficult to sort of do things like equity, splitting into your employees. It makes it a lot more difficult to have outside investors come in who want to, have a stake in whatever they're investing. Partnership, talk about very briefly, it's essentially a sole proprietorship with more than one person, right? And it comes with some additional benefits, basically being that you're not just out there banging away by yourself, but it does come with some additional issues. One of which being that you have shared liability. In a partnership, if you and your business partner are going along and your partner does something that, they make it the exploding widget in our previous scenario, well, not only are they liable, but as a partner in the business, you and all of your personal assets, your house, your car, and everything, are also on the line in that, ensuing litigation. There's some specific structures of partnership where you can take some steps to limit that shared liability, but it's a real issue that anyone who is in a partnership should be aware of. And the other one, obviously, is that potential for conflict of interest. It's something that you can mitigate by having a formal partnership agreement. There's lots of ways that you can go about that. But a big issue that happens with people is that they tend to walk into a partnership without thinking about it, and everything is totally fine and simpatico until a problem arises, and then you realize, oh, we don't have a formal partnership agreement, we don't have any kind of personal or backwards indemnification for each other, and now all of these things that we didn't really think about before have suddenly become an issue. The third, and I would say sort of increasingly most common form of business structure for a lot of business is to form a corporation. Now, the corporation comes with a few downsides for sure, which I'll talk about first. One of them being complexity and one of them being cost. So a corporation is a separate legal entity outside of yourself, right? And in order to make that come into being, you have to do a bunch of paperwork, you have to file your articles of incorporation either provincially or federally, and it comes with an annual requirement to have your general meeting. You have to file 2 sets of income tax, obviously, one for yourself, one for the corporation, etc. Those are a lot of things that if that's not something that you're really into personally, and that makes a lot of sense, you can get help with for professional services, lawyer, accountant, etc. And the formal reporting is the other part of that. Having said that, it is an area where you get the most differentiation in terms of what the benefits are. And the 2 big ones are limited liability. So because the corporation is a separate legal entity, if the corporation builds a widget, the widget explodes and hurts someone, and they sue the corporation, you have what we call the corporate veil between the corporate assets and your own personal assets. Even if you own 100% of the company, with some exceptions, the liability for that issue is limited to the assets of the corporation itself. So if you've worked really hard your whole life, and that's enabled you to pay off your mortgage, which in Victoria is an amazing feat, unless you bought your house 25 years ago, and then something bad happens at work, and your work is incorporated, your house is most likely safe. And that's a really big benefit for a small business owner, especially given that for a lot of us, your business and then your home are your 2 big assets in life, right? The other one, which we've kind of covered under the umbrella of enhanced credibility there, is just that is what a lot of people increasingly are expecting in the professional world. So having a corporation with a share structure set up allows you to do a lot of things. It allows your corporate entity to have credit of its own, so that eventually you'll be able to have your corporation have money that it can borrow that you're not liable for personally. You can bring on outside investors to your company a lot more easily, because you can say, in exchange for your investment in my company, I'm going to give you a stake in it, and it's clearly defined as, this many shares with this kind of rights and responsibilities, and that makes it a lot more easy for someone from the outside to say, yes, I feel comfortable about what exactly I'm getting in this deal compared to what I'm putting in. And also, as we'll talk about as we go along, and certainly can field some questions on, it gives you a lot more options in terms of how you structure your business vis-a-vis your employees. So if you have been in business for a long time, you have loyal employees who are like family to you, and you want to give them a stake in your company, that's a lot easier if you're set up as a corporation, right? You can carve out an amount that makes sense to you and them, and hand it over or sell it to them, or structure it whatever way. But then it makes it easy for you to have employees who have a real visceral stake in your business without you as the owner losing the overall control of it, right? Without taking on a partner without realizing that that's what you're doing at the time. So I would argue that most businesses probably would be best served by incorporating, even if you're a relatively small business, for a couple of reasons. Certainly, there's tax advantages. I can speak a little bit about that from a legal standpoint. I'm not an accountant, though. You should discuss that with your accountant if you want to. But the biggest one essentially is that if your business is doing well, you're creating profit, you can actually hold over money inside your corporation, pay a much lower tax rate on it than your personal marginal tax rate probably, and then have that money either to build up your business as you go, or as a sort of retirement asset as you get towards the end of your career. We talked a little bit about the ability to grow. Having a corporate structure set up really makes that a lot easier. And the biggest one by far from my perspective as a liability guy is the liability protection. There are niche situations in which a corporate shareholder, particularly if they're in an officer or director role, can be personally liable for some things, but the vast majority of situations, you're shielded from personal liability for things that happen in your business, and I can't stress enough how important that is. Also, being a corporation gives you some distinct advantages in terms of estate planning tools that are available to you as a business owner. They're not so applicable if you're part of a larger corporation where you have many shareholders, all who have smaller stakes in the company. But if you're the owner or one of a few owners of a closely held corporation, there's some specific tools that when you're thinking about succession planning and when you're thinking about your own estate plan that are available to you that are really effective. And we'll just talk about a couple of them in a second. So I read this kind of shocking statistic from the Canadian Family I forget the name of it. But the key part is that less than half of small businesses have a written formal succession plan. And for more than half of small businesses, I would suggest that that is a problem. People live in the moment, busy doing the day-to-day parts of their business that they need, and don't think about, not only what happens if, I get run over by a bus, but even if I'm sick for a prolonged period of time, what happens in my business? How do things get managed? How does, the authority that I have as the owner, how does that get distributed, and how can I make sure that things are going to keep happening in my absence, whether that's short-term or long-term, let alone, how do I structure that way so that it's efficient. So, some common issues with estate planning for business owners. The first one, and I think one that a lot of people are concerned about, but maybe don't know, where to go, is leadership continuity, right? If you're a small business owner and you're looking at, whether you're passing your business along to your children, your employees, retiring, planning to sell it, how does the business keep rolling smoothly when you as the owner, as the head of the business, start to step away or step away suddenly, right? The second one is tax implications. This is really getting into that estate planning piece that I was talking about before. But when you've grown your business up from nothing to this wonderful thing that in the eyes of the CRA is worth a lot of money, that comes with the exciting news that when you dispose of it, you may owe the CRA a bunch of that money. And the third one, which sort of comes into leadership continuity, is that people don't always think about what happens in the legal system when we pass away. And something that people don't necessarily think about is that if you are a small business owner and you pass away, you have a regular will, and that will goes through our probate registry, which depending on how busy they are, that's a long process. The typical estate takes up to, or more than 18 months to wrap up, and it could be ambiguous about who is supposed to be in control of your business. And if you think about, today, if I stepped away from my business and there was no leadership in place for 18 months, would there be a business 18 months later? As we got covered earlier, for probably more than half of small family-owned businesses, the answer would be no. So there's a bunch of kind of specialized tools in kind of estate planning, but also in sort of succession planning in general that are available to small business owners. This is by no means, a comprehensive review of all of them, but a couple of the more commonly used tools that we implement from a legal standpoint that people don't necessarily think about so often are a multiple will strategy and what we call an estate freeze. So going back to that whole probate thing, for anyone who's not familiar, if you're not a lawyer, why would you be? When you die, when you have a will, and your will goes through the probate registry, which is basically a fancy way of saying that the government rubber stamps your will and says, yes, it's an authentic will, the person that you've chosen to be your executor is in fact going to be your executor, and that everything looks good from their point of view. Firstly, that's a time-consuming process. Your executor has to give notice to everyone listed in your will that they intend to apply as executor. Then they have to do the application, they have to submit it to the registry. Typical timelines for the registry to respond between getting your application and doing anything about it, depending on where you are in BC, are between 8 and 12 weeks. And from there, you actually are just at the start of the estate administration process. Now, if you're just talking about personal assets, that's not such a big deal, right? You're not going to be there, you don't really mind, right? But when you're talking about something that is sort of more of a living, breathing entity, your business, especially when there are people that you want to be taking it on, the fact that it could be hung up in this kind of probate situation for 18 months is a real problem. The other real problem is that despite the fact that we say we don't have estate taxes in BC, we do have what we call a probate fee, where essentially for everything in your estate that is going through this probate process, or the privilege of having that rubber stamp from the Crown, you owe them basically 1.4% of whatever that is. And again, if that's not a large amount of stuff, it doesn't really matter. But if you've successfully built up your business so that it's worth, $1 million, well, suddenly you're talking about thousands of dollars of probate fees. A multiple will strategy basically says, I'm going to have one will for stuff that needs to go through probate, and that's fine. It's just the way the system works. There are some things like if you have, if you do, you've paid off that beautiful house in Victoria, for that to be disposed of by your estate, because the Land Title Survey Authority won't just take your word for it with your will, that needs to go through probate. But if you are a small business owner with a closely held corporation, despite the fact that that might be worth more than your house, those shares don't need to be dealt with by your probated will. You can have a separate will that deals with things that don't need to go through the probate process, and that gives you two main advantages. The first one is you're saving that money, which is great. You know, even if it's not something that you're going to be around to enjoy, you know, you've worked hard to build that up, and you want to pass it along to your, you know, your spouse, your children, your employees, whatever it is. The second one that people think about less, but I would argue is more important, is speed, right? So if you have a second will that governs your business, it doesn't need to go through probate. Your executor of that will can basically deal with that as quickly as they are physically able to, and you know, the shares that you held in the business can go on to your children, spouse, employees, however you want to structure that, and that can happen, you know, very quickly, and then your business can continue to thrive. So that's a really important part of that, and why this is, for people that it's applicable to, a really great strategy. The other one that you may have heard of, because it's an increasingly common thing to do, and it does have some applications outside of business, but it's particularly useful for small businesses where, you know, your business is growing today and you're thinking ahead about the future, which is called an estate freeze. And to make a somewhat complicated situation a little bit less complicated, what you can do is you can utilize a share structure to take whatever the value of your business is today. Say you've built it up to the point where it's worth $1 million, but you're not done running your business. You've got another 5 or 10 great years in you. You have wonderful ideas for how much you're going to grow at that point, and then you want to pass it on to your children or to your employees or to whomever. What you can do is we can set up a share swap where the value of the business at that time is crystallized in terms of what's held in your name. So the stake you own value-wise for capital gains, taxes, etc., will never grow beyond that $1 million. But you are able to retain, sole control of the company. You're not giving away, ownership of the company. You're not giving away, the ability to control what the company is doing. But you've created a different class of shares that you've given to your children and your employees, whomever those people are. And from that point on, any increased value in the company is going to grow in their hands, and you're only going to be limited to dealing with that $1 million of value that you currently have in your hand today. That has a lot of advantages. Firstly, I don't know if anyone's familiar or not, but at least for now, we have a lifetime capital gains exemption in Canada. As of last year, it was pegged at $1.25 million, and that's on a per person basis. So this can be a great thing to do if, for say, your company is worth around that now, and you have a spouse. You can institute an estate freeze, have the next $1.25 million of value of your company grow in your spouse's name. At the point where you sell it for $2.5 million, you're each eligible to claim that $1.25 million lifetime exemption and save yourself, a huge amount of capital gains tax. Likewise, you can do that with your children. It enables some sort of income splitting strategies if you are running a successful business and you have family members who are involved in the business. That can really work out well there as well. And obviously, this also will crystallize whatever your value in the company is in terms of your estate, so that even if it does pass through your single will, now the amount that you're going to be paying that probate fee on is only that crystallized value, not the amount that you've hived off to grow in the hands of your successors. So again, not the only possible strategy, but something that in the right situation can be incredibly helpful and incredibly advantageous. That's the end of the really brief overview. I would love to answer any questions that